The grandchildren found a box in their grandfather's garage, but what they discovered inside revealed incredible secrets from the past. You won't believe this true story, but before watching, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to attract 10 years of good luck. The afternoon sun bathed the small town of Green Hill in a golden light as three young people walked cheerfully down the cobblestone street. Mary, Paul, and Lucy, inseparable cousins, were on their way to their grandfather John's house, a 75-year-old man known for his fascinating stories and welcoming demeanor. "Do you think Grandpa will tell us more about his adventures today?" asked Lucy, the youngest of the three, her brown eyes sparkling with anticipation. Paul, the eldest, smiled and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Knowing Grandpa, he always has a new story up his sleeve, but today I want to explore that old garage of his. There must be lots of interesting things there." Mary, always the voice of reason among the cousins, adjusted her glasses on her face. "Only if Grandpa lets us, Paul. You know how careful he is with old things." Arriving at their grandfather's house, a two-story building with a cozy porch, they were greeted by the unmistakable smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of old music coming from a radio inside the house. John appeared at the door, his wrinkled face lighting up at the sight of his grandchildren. "Ah, what a joy to see you, my dears," exclaimed John, opening his arms to hug all three. Come in, I just made a cornmeal cake that you'll love." While savoring the cake and coffee in the cozy kitchen, Paul couldn't contain his curiosity. "Grandpa, can we take a look in your garage today? There must be lots of cool stuff there." John hesitated for a moment, a shadow passing over his eyes. "Well, it's been a while since I organized that place. It's full of dust and old memories." "Please, Grandpa," begged Lucy, clasping her hands together. "We promise to be careful." The old man smiled, unable to resist the pleading looks of his grandchildren. All right. But be careful. There are many fragile things in there." With smiles from ear to ear, the three young people followed John to the garage. When the door creaked open, it revealed a space filled with fascinating objects, old furniture, dusty boxes, musical instruments, and a myriad of trinkets that seemed to tell silent stories. "Wow!" exclaimed Mary, her eyes scanning the full shelves. "It's like a museum in here." While Paul examined an old record player and Lucy admired a collection of exotic shells, Mary found herself drawn to a carved wooden box in the corner of the garage. Carefully, she opened it, revealing a pile of old photographs. "Guys, come and see this," she called, picking up a particular photo that caught her attention. Paul and Lucy approached, their eyes widening at the sight of the image. It was a black and white photograph, a bit faded at the edges, but still clear enough to distinguish the details. In it, a young man, whom they recognized as their grandfather, stood next to a majestic wolf, his hand resting gently on the animal's thick fur. "Grandpa, is this you in the photo?" Paul asked, showing the image to John, who approached slowly. The old man's face lit up with a mixture of nostalgia and surprise. "Ah, that photo. It's been so long since I saw it. Yes, that's me, many years ago." "But Grandpa, how did you get so close to a wolf?" Lucy asked, her voice a mix of admiration and disbelief. John took the photo with trembling hands, his eyes lost in distant memories. "This, my dears, is the story of an unlikely friendship and an adventure that changed my life forever." The three young people exchanged glances, feeling that they were about to discover a long-held secret. Mary noticed a worn leather-bound book in the same box and picked it up. "Grandpa, what is this book?" John smiled, recognizing the object. My diary from that time. It's full of notes about many interesting things." Paul, always impatient, could hardly contain himself. "Grandpa, tell us. How did you meet that wolf? What happened?" The old man sighed, looking out the garage window at the sky that was beginning to be tinged with the colors of sunset. "It's a long story, my dears. A story of courage, compassion, and a bond that defied nature." Lucy took her grandfather's hand, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Please, Grandpa, we want to know everything." John nodded slowly. "Very well. Let's go to the living room where we'll be more comfortable." This story deserves to be told calmly. As they followed their grandfather into the house, each of the young people felt a different emotion. Paul was eager for adventure, Mary intrigued by the secrets the diary might contain, and Lucy enchanted by the idea of a friendship between a man and a wolf. Settling into his favorite armchair, John began. "It all started almost 50 years ago when I was a young biologist, passionate about nature and determined to make a difference in the world. The old man's words flowed like a river, transporting his grandchildren to a past full of mysteries and wonders. Little did they know that this was just the tip of the iceberg, and that the revelations to come would forever change the way they saw their grandfather and the world around them. As night fell over Green Hill, Old John's house became the epicenter of a story that spanned generations, uniting past and present in a warm embrace of shared memories and revealed secrets. The living room of Grandpa John's house was enveloped in an expectant silence. Mary, Paul, and Lucy settled on the soft couch, their eyes fixed on their grandfather's wrinkled face, eager to hear more about his mysterious story. John opened the old leather-bound diary, its yellowed pages exuding the peculiar aroma of long-kept memories. "As I said," John began, his voice taking on a nostalgic tone, "I was a young biologist, full of ideals and with a burning passion for nature. At that time, I was working on a conservation project in the Green Mountains, studying the local fauna." Paul leaned forward, his eyes shining with curiosity. "And that's where you found the wolf, Grandpa?" John smiled, shaking his head. "Patience, my boy. The story begins a little before that. You see, at that time, red wolves were already a rare species, but it was still possible to spot them occasionally in the more remote areas." Flipping through the diary, John found a specific page and began to read, "May 15th, 1975. Today, during my expedition through the western region of the mountains, I found intriguing footprints. Larger than those of a common red wolf, something is happening in these mountains, something that defies my current understanding of the local fauna." Mary adjusted her glasses, her analytical mind already working. "Did you suspect a new species, Grandpa?" "Exactly, dear," John replied with a smile. "I was convinced that I had discovered something extraordinary. I spent the following weeks tracking these mysterious footprints, camping in remote locations, hoping to catch a glimpse of this elusive creature." Lucy hugged a pillow, completely absorbed in the story. "And did you manage to see the wolf?" John closed his eyes for a moment as if reliving the scene. "Yes, Lucy, but not in the way I expected. It was on a full moon night. I was camped near a cave." As John narrated, the grandchildren could almost see the scene unfolding before their eyes. Young John, with his research equipment, sitting by a campfire, attentively watching the forest around him. The sound of the wind in the trees, the crackling of the fire, and then a distant howl, powerful and melancholic. "My heart almost stopped," John continued. "That sound was different from anything I had ever heard before. Deeper, more ancient somehow. I knew I had to investigate." Paul couldn't contain his excitement. "You went after the howl alone? At night?" John laughed softly. "Youth makes us brave or foolish depending on the point of view. Yes, I took my flashlight and followed the sound. It was when I reached the entrance of a cave that I saw it for the first time." The three young people held their breath, completely engrossed in the narrative. "There he was," John continued, his voice almost a whisper. "A magnificent wolf, larger than any other I had ever seen. His fur was a silvery grey that glowed under the moonlight. But something was wrong. He was lying at the entrance of the cave, and I could see that his front paw was injured." "What did you do, Grandpa?" Lucy asked, her eyes wide. John took the photo they had found in the garage, looking at it fondly. "I did the only thing I could do. I approached slowly, showing that I was not a threat. The wolf watched me with intelligent eyes full of pain, but also with a certain curiosity." Mary frowned, thoughtful. "But Grandpa, wild wolves would normally run away from humans, wouldn't they?" "Exactly, Mary. And that's when I realized there was something special about this wolf. He allowed me to get close, to examine his wound. It was as if he knew I was there to help." John paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. "I spent the next few weeks taking care of that wolf, cleaning his wound, bringing him food, gaining his trust. And gradually, we formed a bond that I never imagined possible between a man and a wild animal." Paul seemed fascinated. "And did you give him a name?" John smiled, a spark of joy in his eyes. "Yes, I called him Silver because of his silvery fur. But, my dears, this friendship with Silver was just the beginning of an incredible journey." The old man stood up slowly, walking to the window. The night sky was dotted with stars, as if the universe were paying attention to his story. "You see, while I was taking care of Silver, I began to notice strange things happening in the forest. Plants growing at impossible speeds, animals displaying unusual behaviors. Lucy approached her grandfather, taking his hand. "What was happening, Grandpa?" John turned to his grandchildren, his face a mixture of emotions. "That, my dears, is something that took me years to fully understand. And it's related not only to Silver, but also to another very special companion who was part of my life, an extraordinary parrot named Echo." The three young people exchanged intrigued looks. How did a parrot fit into this story of wolves and mysterious forests? "But that's a story for tomorrow," John said, noticing the clock on the wall. "It's getting late, and some revelations need a good night's sleep to be fully appreciated." While the grandchildren protested, wanting to hear more, John laughed softly. "Patience, my dears. Tomorrow we will continue our journey through the past, and I promise that the surprises to come go beyond your imagination." That night, Mary, Paul, and Lucy went to bed with their heads full of images of silvery wolves, mysterious forests, and secrets yet to be revealed. Little did they know that the next day's revelations would forever change their understanding of their grandfather, nature, and the invisible bonds that connect all living things. The dawn in Green Hill brought with it a palpable energy of anticipation. Mary, Paul, and Lucy could barely sleep, their minds filled with images of silvery wolves and mysterious forests. As the first rays of sunlight penetrated through the curtains, the three young people were already up, eager to hear more about their grandfather's fascinating story. They found John on the porch, contemplating the horizon with a cup of coffee in his hands. His distant gaze suggested that he was already immersed in his memories. "Good morning, Grandpa," exclaimed Lucy, hugging her grandfather affectionately. "We're ready to hear more about Silver and Echo." John smiled, his eyes shining with his grandchildren's enthusiasm. "Ah, my dears, I see curiosity woke you up early. Very well, let's continue our journey through the past." They settled in the living room, the old leather-bound diary on John's lap. He opened it, flipping through until he found the desired page. "Where were we?" he asked rhetorically. "Ah, yes. I had told you about how I found and took care of Silver, the silvery wolf. But the story gets even more intriguing from there." John cleared his throat and began to read. "July 10th, 1975. The observations of the past weeks have been surprising. Silver's recovery is almost miraculous, his wound healing at an unusual speed. More than that, I noticed changes in the vegetation around the cave. The plants seem more vibrant, growing at an accelerated rate. There is something in this place that defies scientific logic." Mary leaned forward, intrigued. "Grandpa, do you think there was some connection between Silver and these changes in the forest?" John nodded slowly. "At that time, I wasn't sure, but the more time I spent with Silver, the more evidence emerged that he was not an ordinary wolf. His behavior, his intelligence, it were extraordinary. Paul, always the most impetuous, couldn't contain his curiosity. And the parrot, Grandpa. Where does Echo come into this story?" An enigmatic smile appeared on John's face. "Ah, Echo." He entered the scene in a rather unusual way. "You see, while I was taking care of Silver and studying the forest's anomalies, I began to hear a strange voice echoing through the woods." Lucy widened her eyes. "A voice? In the forest?" "Exactly," John confirmed. "At first I thought it was my imagination. But as the days passed, it became clear that there was something or someone nearby repeating words and phrases in an almost magical way." John turned a few pages of the diary and read again. August 15th, 1975. "Today, I finally discovered the source of the mysterious voices. It's a parrot, larger and more colorful than any other I've seen, but it's not an ordinary parrot. His vocalizations are too complex, almost as if he were trying to communicate something specific." The three young people exchanged looks of amazement. The story was getting more and more fascinating. "Echo didn't just repeat random words," John continued. "He seemed to understand the context, responding to situations in an almost human way. And the most intriguing, he had a special bond with Silver." "What do you mean, Grandpa?" asked Mary, adjusting her glasses. John closed his eyes for a moment, as if visualizing the scene. "Imagine a majestic silvery wolf and a parrot of vibrant colors side by side, as if they were old friends. Echo would perch on Silver's back, and the two seemed to communicate in a way that I couldn't understand." Paul couldn't contain his excitement. "That's incredible, Grandpa. But what did it all mean?" Ah, my dear, John smiled. That's the question that tormented me for weeks. The more I observed Silver and Echo, the more I realized that I was witnessing something truly extraordinary. The forest around them seemed alive, not just in a biological sense, but as if it had a consciousness of its own. Lucy hugged her knees, completely absorbed in the narrative. "And what did you do, Grandpa?" John took the photo of himself with Silver, looking at it fondly. "I did what any scientist would do. I documented everything meticulously. But I also did something that might not have been very scientific. I opened my heart and mind to the possibility that there was much more to nature than our science could explain." The old man sighed, his gaze lost in distant memories. "In the following weeks, I spent every moment I could with Silver and Echo. I observed how they interacted with the forest, how the plants and other animals responded to their presence. It was as if they were guardians of some kind of ancient magic." Mary, always the most skeptical of the trio, seemed to struggle to understand. "But Grandpa, this sounds so fantastic. How could something like this be real?" John smiled gently at his granddaughter. "Mary dear, there are more mysteries in this world than we can imagine. What happened next defied everything I believed I knew about nature and about myself." He paused dramatically, looking at each of his grandchildren. "It was when I discovered the true secret of the forest, a secret that Silver and Echo were protecting, a secret that would change my life forever." The three young people were on the edge of their seats, eager to hear more. But John closed the diary gently. "I think it's time for a break," he said with a mischievous smile. "How about we take a walk around town? Sometimes, to understand the past, we need to reconnect with the present." While the grandchildren protested, wanting to hear more of the story, John stood up with surprising agility for his age. "Patience, my dears. The revelation to come deserves a special setting, and believe me, it's worth the wait." Reluctantly but intrigued, Mary, Paul, and Lucy followed their grandfather outside. As they walked through the cobblestone streets of Green Hill, their minds buzzed with possibilities. What secret could be so extraordinary? And how could this story from the past affect their lives in the present? Little did they know that the answers to these questions were closer than they imagined, hidden in the most unlikely corners of their small town. The afternoon sun bathed the streets of Green Hill in a golden light, as John guided his grandchildren through paths that seemed familiar, but now took on new meanings. Mary, Paul, and Lucy observed the town with renewed eyes, as if every corner could hide a secret related to their grandfather's fantastic story. "Grandpa, where exactly are we going?" asked Paul, his curiosity growing with each step. John smiled mysteriously. "Patience, my boy. Sometimes to understand the future, we need to revisit the past." They arrived at an old square in the town center. In the middle of it stood a centenary tree, its branches extending like a green umbrella over the worn wooden benches. "This tree," John began, stroking the gnarled trunk, "was here long before Green Hill existed. The ancients said it guarded the forest's secrets." Lucy looked up, admiring the tree's magnitude. "It's incredible, Grandpa. But what does this have to do with your story?" John sat on one of the benches, inviting his grandchildren to do the same. "Everything is connected, my dears. The story I'm telling you is not just about the past, but about how the past shapes our present and future." He took the old diary from his pocket, flipping through it until he found a specific page. "Let me continue from where we left off. I had discovered that Silver and Echo were more than just animals. They were guardians of an ancient forest secret." The three young people leaned forward, eager for more information. John began to read. September 20th, 1975. "Today I witnessed something that defies all logic and reason. Following Silver and Echo deep into the forest, we reached a hidden clearing. What I saw there seemed like pure magic. Plants glowed with their own light. Animals of different species coexisted in perfect harmony. In the center of it all, an ancient tree, much like the one here in the square, pulsed with an energy that I could feel reverberating through my very being." Mary adjusted her glasses, her analytical mind struggling to comprehend. "Grandpa, this sound impossible?" John finished with a smile. "I thought so too, dear. But what happened next changed everything I believed I knew about the world." He continued reading. "Echo perched on Silver's shoulder, and together they approached the central tree. To my surprise, Echo began to speak. Not the usual repetitions of a parrot, but clear and meaningful words in a language I had never heard before. The tree responded, not with words, but with a pulsating light that seemed to communicate something profound. Paul could hardly contain his excitement. What were they saying, Grandpa? John closed the diary, his eyes distant. At that moment, I didn't understand. But slowly, with Echo's help, I began to decipher it. It was an ancient language, the language of nature itself. Silver and Echo were more than just guardians. They were intermediaries between our world and the hidden world of the forest. Lucy, always the most sensitive, seemed deeply touched. That's beautiful, Grandpa. But why are you telling us this now? John stood up, walking to the centenary tree in the square. Because, my dears, what I learned in that clearing didn't stay confined to the forest. The knowledge, the connection with nature. I brought it with me when I returned home. He placed his hand on the gnarled trunk, and for a moment, the young people swore they saw a faint glow emanating from where his fingers touched the bark. Green Hill is not just an ordinary town, John continued. It was built on the principles I learned from Silver and Echo. Harmony with nature, respect for natural cycles, the understanding that everything is interconnected. Mary looked around, as if seeing the town for the first time. Is that why Green Hill is so different, so special? John nodded. Exactly. Every tree planted, every building erected, everything was done with the knowledge I acquired in that magical clearing. But maintaining this balance is not easy, and that's why I needed to share this story with you. Paul frowned, thoughtful. But Grandpa, what happened to Silver and Echo? A look of sadness crossed John's face. Ah, that's a difficult part of the story. You see, over time I realized that my constant presence in the forest was altering the delicate balance that Silver and Echo protected. As much as it hurt, I knew I had to step back. Lucy took her grandfather's hand, feeling his emotion. You never saw them again? John smiled softly. Not in the same way, dear, but they never really left me. Echo taught me words of power, phrases that, when spoken correctly, can invoke a bit of the forest's magic. And Silver, well, sometimes on full moon nights I swear I can hear his howl in the distance. Suddenly, a gentle breeze blew through the square, making the leaves of the centenary tree whisper in an almost musical way. John looked at his grandchildren, his eyes shining with a mixture of emotion and determination. And that's why you are here. Green Hill, this town we love so much, needs new guardians. The knowledge I acquired needs to be passed on so that the balance can be maintained. The three young people exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and apprehension on their faces. They now understood that their grandfather's story was not just a narrative of the past, but a call for the future. But how can we be guardians, Grandpa? Asked Mary, her voice trembling slightly. We don't have magical powers or connections with talking wolves and parrots. John laughed softly. Ah, my dear, the magic is not in the animals or the words. It's in the connection, in the deep understanding that we are part of something greater. And that connection, that understanding is something I can teach you. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, John looked at each of his grandchildren. Are you ready to learn the secrets of the forest? To become the new guardians of Green Hill? Mary, Paul, and Lucy exchanged another look, a silent agreement passing between them. With firm voices and eyes shining with determination, they responded in unison, We're ready, Grandpa. And so, under the branches of the centenary tree, with the wind whispering ancient secrets, a new generation of guardians began their journey. The story of Silver and Echo gained a new chapter, echoing through time and connecting past, present, and future in a magical web of possibilities. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries for Mary, Paul, and Lucy. Under John's patient guidance, the three young people began to see Green Hill and the world around them with new eyes. Each morning brought a new lesson, each afternoon a new revelation. One of those mornings, while the dew still glistened on the grass in John's backyard, the four gathered for another lesson. Today, John began, his voice calm but full of purpose, we will learn about the secret language of nature. Lucy, always the most enthusiastic, could hardly contain her excitement. Like the words Echo used, Grandpa. John smiled, nodding. Exactly, dear. But remember, it's not just words. It's a form of communication that involves all the senses, your entire essence. He guided them to a small garden in the back of the house, where plants of various species grew in harmony. Close your eyes, he instructed gently. Breathe deeply and try to feel the energy around you. The three obeyed, their expressions a mixture of concentration and skepticism, especially in Mary's case. Now, John continued, I will pronounce one of the phrases I learned from Echo. Pay attention not just to the sound but to how it makes you feel. With surprising clarity, John pronounced words in a language that none of the young people recognized but somehow understood in their hearts. It was melodious, fluid, almost as if the wind itself was singing. Suddenly, Mary gasped, opening her eyes. I felt something, like a tingling, starting in my feet and moving up. Paul and Lucy also opened their eyes, expressions of amazement on their faces. The flowers, Paul murmured, pointing to the garden. They seem brighter. John smiled, proud. What you experienced was a direct connection with the energy of nature. The words are just a catalyst, a way to tune our senses to the world around us. Over the following weeks, John continued to instruct his grandchildren in the mysteries he had learned decades ago. He taught them to identify hidden medicinal plants, to predict weather changes by observing animal behavior, and to find underground water using ancient dowsing techniques. But not everything was peaceful lessons and harmonious discoveries. One afternoon, while practicing deep listening in the forest around Green Hill, Paul made a disturbing discovery. "Grandpa," he called, his voice tense. "Something's wrong here." The others quickly approached. Paul was crouched near a stream, his hands trembling slightly as he pointed to the water. John leaned in, his face contorting into an expression of concern. "Oh no," he murmured. "This isn't good." The water, which should have been crystal clear, had a slightly murky tint and an almost imperceptible but unpleasant odor. Mary, always the analytical one, was already taking samples in a small vial she carried for her explorations. "We need to analyze this," she said firmly. "It could be contamination." John nodded gravely. "You're right to be concerned. This stream is one of the forest's lifelines. If it's contaminated, the entire ecosystem could be at risk." Lucy, who had wandered a bit away, called the others. "Look at this," she said, pointing to some marks on the ground. "They look like footprints, but they're not from any animal I know." John examined the marks, his face growing more serious by the moment. "This," he said slowly, "is a sign that our teachings couldn't have come at a better time. Green Hill is facing a threat, and you, my dears, will be crucial in protecting it." The three young people exchanged glances, the reality of their new responsibility as guardians finally sinking in. "But what can we do, Grandpa?" asked Mary, her voice a mix of determination and apprehension. "We're just three young people." John smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. "You are much more than that. You are the new guardians of Green Hill, connected with the ancient wisdom of the forest. And believe me, that connection is more powerful than any modern tool." He stood up, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "What we discovered today is just the beginning. There are forces at work that threaten the balance that has kept Green Hill protected for so long. Our task now is to discover the source of this threat and find a way to restore harmony." Paul, always the most impulsive, already seemed ready for action. "Where do we start, Grandpa?" John placed his hands on his grandchildren's shoulders, his gaze intense. "We start by going back to the roots. It's time to revisit the clearing where I met Silver and Echo. There we may find the answers we need and perhaps some unexpected help." As they walked back home, the air seemed charged with a new energy. The birds' songs, the rustling of the leaves, even the murmur of the contaminated stream, everything seemed to be conveying an urgent message. Mary, Paul, and Lucy felt the weight of responsibility, but also a growing excitement. They had been chosen for a mission greater than they ever imagined, and they were determined not to disappoint their grandfather or the land they now swore to protect. As the shadows lengthened and night approached, the four guardians, one old and three new, prepared for a journey that would test not only their newfound knowledge, but also their courage, their unity, and their connection with the mysterious forces of nature. The fate of Green Hill was in their hands, and the true adventure was just beginning. The dawn found Mary, Paul, and Lucy already awake, their hearts pounding with a mix of anxiety and determination. Today was the day they would embark on the journey to the mysterious clearing where, decades ago, their grandfather John had discovered the secrets that changed his life and shaped the destiny of Green Hill. John awaited them on the porch, an old but well-kept backpack at his feet. His eyes shone with an energy that seemed to defy his advanced age. "Are you ready, my dears?" he asked, his voice firm and full of purpose. The three nodded, each carrying their own backpack with supplies and equipment that John had instructed them to bring. "Remember," John said as they began walking towards the forest, "the clearing is more than a physical place. It is a nexus of energy, a point where the barriers between our world and the natural world become thinner." As they ventured into the forest, the young guardians noticed their perceptions were more acute. The bird songs seemed to carry hidden messages. The rustling of the leaves sounded like ancient whispers. Mary, always attentive to details, noticed something curious. "Grandpa, the trees, they seem to be guiding us. Look how the branches bend, almost forming a path." John smiled, proud. "Very well observed, Mary. The forest recognizes our intention. It is helping us on our journey." As they advanced, the landscape around them began to change subtly. The trees seemed older, their gnarled trunks telling silent stories of centuries past. The air grew denser, filled with aromas none of them could fully identify. Paul, always the restless one, couldn't contain his curiosity. "Grandpa, how long did it take you to find the clearing for the first time?" John laughed softly. "Days, Paul. Days of tireless searching, following clues that often seemed to lead nowhere. But today, with your help and the knowledge I've shared, our journey will be different." Lucy, who was walking a bit ahead, suddenly stopped, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" Everyone fell silent, listening intently. At first, they couldn't distinguish anything beyond the usual sounds of the forest, but then, almost imperceptibly, they began to hear a melody. It was distant, ethereal, as if carried by the wind. "It's the clearing's call," John explained, his voice low and reverent. "It senses our presence and invites us to approach." Guided by the mysterious melody, the four continued their journey. The vegetation grew denser, and at several points they had to use the techniques John had taught them to find the correct path. After hours of walking, when the sun was high in the sky, they reached a wall of vegetation so dense it seemed impenetrable. "This is it," John announced, his voice trembling with emotion. "The entrance to the clearing is hidden in this green wall." Mary frowned, confused. "But Grandpa, there's no passage here." John smiled mysteriously. "Not everything is as it seems, dear. Remember Echo's words." Understanding what their grandfather meant, the three young people concentrated, recalling the ancient phrases they had learned. Together, in unison, they pronounced the magical words. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, almost as if responding to the call, the vegetation began to move. Branches parted, leaves folded, and before their amazed eyes a passage opened. "Incredible," whispered Paul, his voice barely containing the awe. Crossing the newly formed passage, the four guardians emerged into a place that seemed to belong to another world. The clearing was a perfect circle, surrounded by ancient trees whose branches intertwined above, forming a natural dome. In the center, exactly as John had described in his story, stood a majestic tree, its wide and gnarled trunk pulsing with a soft light. Flowers of species they had never seen before covered the ground, their petals shining with impossible colors. Butterflies and hummingbirds danced in the air, their movements synchronized as if in a rehearsed choreography. "Welcome," John said, his voice choked with emotion, "to the heart of the forest." The three young people were speechless, absorbing the beauty and magic of the place. But their admiration was interrupted by an unexpected sound, a high-pitched and melodious chirp that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Suddenly, a flash of vibrant colors cut through the air, and a parrot with exuberant plumage landed on John's shoulder. "Echo?" John asked, incredulous. The parrot tilted its head, its intelligent eyes studying each of them. Then, to everyone's astonishment, it spoke, "Welcome, guardians. We have been expecting you." Mary, Paul, and Lucy exchanged glances, a mix of shock and wonder on their faces. The presence of Echo, the legendary parrot from their grandfather's stories, made everything real in a way they weren't entirely prepared for. John, with tears in his eyes, gently stroked Echo's feathers. "My old friend, I didn't expect to see you again." Echo shook its feathers as if settling in for a long conversation. "The danger that threatens the forest has brought us together once again, John, and you have brought new allies." The parrot turned its penetrating gaze to the young people. "The forest has chosen its new guardians well, but the challenge you face is greater than you imagine. A sudden wind blew through the clearing, making the leaves of the central tree whisper in an ancient language. The tree pulsed more intensely, and everyone felt a wave of energy passing through them. "Come," Echo said, taking flight towards the central tree. "There is much to learn, and little time. The forest's balance and green hills depends on you." As they followed Echo to the center of the clearing, Mary, Paul, and Lucy realized they were about to dive into a world of knowledge and responsibilities far beyond anything they had imagined. The true journey of the new Guardians was just beginning, and the fate of their home and the nature they swore to protect was in their hands. The heart of the clearing pulsed with an ancient and powerful energy. Mary, Paul, and Lucy approached the central tree, guided by Echo and accompanied by their grandfather, John. As they drew closer, they could feel the vibration of the earth beneath their feet, as if the very soil were alive and aware. Echo perched on one of the lower branches of the majestic tree, its feathers glowing with a supernatural radiance. "Touch the trunk," the parrot instructed, its melodious voice echoing through the clearing. "Let the forest's wisdom flow through you." Hesitant, the three young people extended their hands, touching the tree's rough bark. The moment their fingers made contact, a wave of sensations and images flooded their minds. Mary gasped, her eyes widening behind her glasses. "I'm seeing the forest's history, thousands of years passing in seconds." "I can feel the pain," murmured Paul, his voice trembling. "The forest is suffering." Lucy, for her part, seemed to be in a trance. There is a threat. Something dark approaching, corrupting everything it touches. John watched his grandchildren with a mix of pride and concern. He knew this moment would change their lives forever, just as it had changed his decades ago. Echo flapped its wings, drawing everyone's attention. "What you experienced is only a fraction of the knowledge the forest holds. But it is enough to understand the gravity of the situation." The parrot flew to the ground, walking in circles as it spoke. "The contamination you discovered in the stream is just a symptom of a greater evil. An external force is trying to disrupt the natural harmony, not only of this forest, but of the entire Green Hill region." Mary, always the analytical one, was the first to ask the question on everyone's mind. "But what exactly is causing this? And how can we stop it?" Echo exchanged a significant look with John before responding. "The source of the corruption is an ancient relic, an artifact of great power that was buried centuries ago to protect the world from its malevolent influence. Unfortunately, it has recently been disturbed and is now spreading its negative energy." Paul frowned, confused. "A relic? How can an object cause so much damage?" John sighed deeply, his expression serious. "Some objects, my dears, carry more than just history. They can contain energies, intentions, and even consciousnesses from past eras. This particular relic is a receptacle of forces that go against the natural flow of life." Lucy, always the most intuitive of the group, seemed to be connecting the dots. "The strange footprints we saw near the stream, they have something to do with this, don't they?" Echo nodded, or at least made a motion that resembled a nod for a parrot. "Perceptive, young guardian. The relic's energy is attracting and corrupting creatures of the forest. Those footprints were from animals transformed, made grotesque and aggressive by the artifact's influence." The gravity of the situation began to weigh on the young guardian's shoulders. It was not just a matter of cleaning a stream or protecting a few trees. It was a battle for the very essence of nature. "What is our role in all this?" asked Mary, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "How can we fight something so supernatural?" John approached, placing a comforting hand on his granddaughter's shoulder. "With the same power that created the problem, my dear. The ancient magic you are learning, the deep connection with nature you are developing. These are the tools we will use to restore the balance." Echo took flight again, landing in the center of the circle formed by the humans. "Your mission, young guardians, is threefold. First, you must strengthen your connection with the forest, deepening your knowledge and skills. Second, you need to locate the corrupted relic and neutralize its influence. And third, you must heal the wounds already inflicted on the land and its creatures." Paul, always eager for action, stepped forward. "And where do we start?" The parrot spread its wings, and for a moment it seemed much larger and more imposing than a simple bird. "We begin with an ancient ritual, one that will fully awaken your powers as guardians and strengthen your bond with the forest." John smiled. memories of his own awakening as a guardian decades ago shining in his eyes. It's an intense process, my dears. It will require courage, determination, and faith. Are you prepared? Mary, Paul, and Lucy exchanged glances. In their eyes there was fear, yes, but also a fierce determination. They had been chosen for this task, and they would not back down. "We are ready," they answered in unison. The clearing seemed to come alive around them. Flowers glowed more brightly, the wind whispered ancient melodies, and the great central tree pulsed with a light that seemed to come from another world. Echo began to sing, its voice rising in a language that the young people did not know, but somehow understood in their hearts. John joined in the song, his deep voice harmonizing with the parrot's melody. Mary, Paul, and Lucy closed their eyes, feeling the forest's energy flow through them. It was the beginning of a transformation, the awakening of ancient powers that lay dormant in their genes, waiting for this moment. As the ritual unfolded, the clearing glowed with a supernatural light, visible even to the most distant inhabitants of Green Hill. A new era was beginning, and the young guardians were at its center. The battle for nature's harmony was about to begin, and the fate of Green Hill, and perhaps the world, rested in the hands of these three brave young people, guided by their grandfather's wisdom and the forest's ancient magic. The dawn found Mary, Paul, and Lucy transformed. The ritual in the clearing had awakened in them abilities and senses they hadn't known they possessed. Now they could feel the pulse of life in every tree, hear the whispers of the wind as if they were clear words, and see the energy currents flowing through the earth. John watched them with a mix of pride and concern. "The path ahead will not be easy," he said, his voice grave. "But you are not alone in this journey." Echo, who had remained with them through the night, took flight, landing on Lucy's shoulder. "The forest is with you," the parrot declared, "and I will be your guide." With renewed determination, the group set out in search of the corrupted relic. Guided by Echo and the young guardian's newly sharpened senses, they ventured into parts of the forest that seemed to have been forgotten by time. As they advanced, the signs of corruption became more evident. Trees with blackened leaves, wilted flowers emitting a putrid odor, and the disturbing silence where there should have been birdsong and the hum of insects. "We're close," murmured Mary, her eyes half closed as she concentrated on the negative energy currents she could now perceive. Suddenly, a ferocious roar echoed through the forest, making the ground tremble beneath their feet. From among the trees emerged a creature that seemed straight out of a nightmare. A bear, but deformed and enlarged by the relic's malevolent energy, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Don't attack," shouted John. "It is not our true enemy, just a victim." Paul stepped forward, his hand extended as he murmured healing words he had learned during the ritual. A soft light emanated from his fingers, enveloping the corrupted bear. For a moment the creature hesitated, as if struggling against the malevolent influence. But then, with a roar of pain, it advanced. Lucy reacted instinctively. Placing her hands on the ground, she invoked the roots of nearby trees which rose from the soil to form a protective barrier around the group. "There!" exclaimed Mary, pointing to a cave partially hidden behind the creature. "The negative energy is coming from that place." John nodded gravely. "The relic must be inside. We need to get to it and neutralize it." Working together, the Guardians used their new abilities to clear a path to the cave. Paul continued to send waves of healing energy to the bear, while Lucy maintained the root barrier, and Mary used her newly discovered ability to manipulate the wind to dispel the toxic miasmas emanating from the cave entrance. Inside the dark cave, they found the source of all the evil, an ancient amulet black as the darkest night, pulsing with a malevolent energy that distorted the air around it. "Be careful," warned Echo, its voice echoing in the cave. "Its touch can corrupt even the purest of hearts." John stepped forward, his eyes shining with years of wisdom. "Together," he said, "we must combine our powers to neutralize its influence." Forming a circle around the relic, the 5 guardians, 3 young, 1 old, and a magical parrot, began to chant the ancient words they had learned. Their voices rose in harmony, echoing off the cave walls and reverberating through the forest. As they sang, a light began to emanate from their bodies, enveloping the amulet in a cocoon of pure energy. The relic resisted, its darkness fighting against the light, but gradually its influence began to wane. With one final, combined effort, The Guardians directed all their energy towards the artifact. There was a blinding flash of light, a sound like distant thunder, and then silence. When their eyes adjusted again, they saw that the amulet had transformed. Where there had been a black, malevolent gem, there now lay a clear, bright crystal, pulsing gently with a benign energy. "We did it," whispered Lucy, her voice trembling with exhaustion and relief. Emerging from the cave, they found a scene of transformation. The corrupted bear had returned to its natural form, and now watched them with clear, curious eyes before peacefully disappearing into the forest. The trees around them seemed greener, the air cleaner, and the sounds of wildlife began to return. "This is just the beginning," said John, placing a hand on each of his grandchildren's shoulders. "The forest will start to heal, but there's still much work to be done." Echo flew in circles above them, its voice filled with approval. "You have proven your worth as guardians. From now on, Green Hill will have protectors worthy of its magical heritage." In the months that followed, Mary, Paul, and Lucy dedicated themselves to fully restoring the balance of the forest and Green Hill. Using their new powers and the knowledge passed on by John and Echo, they healed sick areas, purified contaminated waters, and re-established harmony between the town's inhabitants and the surrounding nature. The story of the young guardians spread, first as a whisper among the trees, then as legends told around campfires, and finally as a reminder to all of the importance of living in balance with the natural world. One quiet afternoon, nearly a year after their great adventure, the three young people gathered with John on the porch of his house, watching the sunset over Green Hill. "You have transformed not just the forest," said John, his eyes shining with pride, "but also yourselves and the future of our community." Mary smiled, adjusting her glasses. "And to think it all started with a simple visit to your garage, Grandpa." Paul laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Simple? Nothing in our family seems simple, apparently." Lucy, stroking Echo's feathers, who was now a frequent visitor, added softly, "But we wouldn't change any of it, would we?" A melodious chirp from Echo seemed to agree, making everyone laugh. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the Guardians of Green Hill contemplated the future. They knew there would be more challenges ahead, more mysteries to unravel, and more lessons to learn. But now they were prepared, united not just by blood ties, but by a deep connection with nature and each other. Night fell over Green Hill, bringing with it the promise of a new dawn. And deep in the forest, the ancient trees whispered stories of courage, friendship, and the eternal magic that flows through all living things, connecting past, present, and future in an infinite tapestry of possibilities.